The House will be in order. Introduction of bills.
House File 967 by Committee on State Government, a bill for an act relating to benefits and contributions for members of the Iowa Public Employees Retirement Fund who are employed in a protected occupation.
First reading bills now commitment for Committee on Ways and Means.
Senate File 22 by Lofgren and others, a bill for an act relating to the use of electronic devices.
The House will be in order. Introduction of bills.
House File 967 by Committee on State Government, a bill for an act relating to benefits and contributions for members of the Iowa Public Employees Retirement Fund who are employed in a protected occupation.
First reading bills now commitment for Committee on Ways and Means.
Senate File 22 by Lofgren and others, a bill for an act relating to the use of electronic devices.
The House will be in order. Introduction of bills.
Protected 967 by Committee on State Government, a bill for an act relating to benefits and contributions for members of File 22 by Public Employees Retirement Fund.
The House will be in order. Introduction of bills.
Protected 967 by Committee on State
First reading bills now commitment for Committee on Ways and Means.
Senate File 22 by Public Employees Retirement Fund.
The House will be in order. Introduction of bills.
Protected 967 by Committee on State.
Well, I heard one. I apologize. Yes, there is an objection. The clerk will open the machine. This needs 51 votes to move the motion. Oh, I apologize. Representative Winchell, would you like to make a motion? You may approach well. Chair recognizes Representative Winchell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Seeing as how unanimous consent was not granted, I now move to place the following bills on unfinished business. Senate File 605, 266, 233, 22, 603, 75, 311, 470.
Representative Winchell moves the motion. The clerk will open the machine and receive your vote. Clerk close the machine. Those voting aye, 64. Johnson and Polk votes aye. Or votes no. Losi votes aye. This not being a record roll call vote, the clerk will close the machine. The House may attention results. Vote those voting aye 66, voting no 32, absent not voting 2. The motion prevails. Chair recognizes Representative Winchell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At this time, please recognize Representative Kaufman for House File 786 and Representative T. Moore for House File 722.
Chair recognizes Representative Kaufman for opening remarks on House File 786.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good afternoon, Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House. House File 786 is the County Supervisor Representation Plans. That concludes my opening comments.
Recognize Representative Kaufman for a substitution.
I was just waiting for that. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to substitute Senate File 75, which is identical to House File 786.
Are there objections? Hearing none, the chair recognizes Representative Kaufman for opening remarks on Senate File 75.
That concludes my opening comments.
There are amendments. Will the clerk call up the amendments?
H1107 by Zabner of Johnson.
Chair recognizes Representative Zabner for opening remarks on Amendment H1107.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, good afternoon. Representative is not just a job title, it is also a job description. In discussions about this bill and its goal of moving certain counties' supervisors into districts, there's been a lot of talk about people in these communities not feeling represented. I hear almost weekly from folks in Johnson County who don't feel represented because they don't hear from their representatives. This is a simple amendment. All it would require is that every member of the legislature do at least one forum in each county they represent. Goal of moving certain counties' supervisors into districts. I think it's a simple amendment, and we should all be able to get behind it in the hopes that our constituents would feel represented and be able to bring communities not feeling represented. Those conclude my opening comments. I hear almost weekly from folks in Johnson County who don't feel represented.
Vote no.
Chair,
forum in each county they represent. Goal of moving.
Chair recognizes Representative Winchell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would question whether or not this amendment is germane.
Representative Winchell, your point is well taken. The chair you're more than welcome. Chair recognizes Representative Zabner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move for suspension of the rules and immediate consideration of Amendment H1107.
Representative Zabner moves immediate consideration of Amendment H1107. Representative Conference requests a division of record, seconded by Representative Mattson. It's now a record roll call vote. With the clerk open the machine, see your vote. Losi votes no. Bloomingdale votes no. Jones votes no. Bowden votes no. Hope votes no. Have you all now voted? Clerk, close the machine. The House pay attention to results of vote. Those voting aye, 33. Those voting no, 65. Absent or not voting, 2. The motion has failed. Chair, call up the next amendment.
H1108 by Wickton of Lynn.
Chair recognizes Representative Wickton for opening remarks. Amendment H1108.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the House. My amendment removes the preemption by this legislature and restores local controls to our counties and municipalities to raise the minimum wage. As you may be aware, the minimum wage has not been raised in 18 years. This legislature took control of local governments, preempted local governments in 2017 and has not made any effort to raise the minimum wage since that time. One of the primary focuses of local government is economic development, and by restoring local control of this issue, it will enable Iowa to combat its workforce shortage, compete with our neighboring states who have higher minimum wages than Iowa, and increase tax revenue for the state. On a personal note, I've heard it said the majority party is the party of the working class, and if that's true, that's wonderful. Let's work together to put more money into Iowa's pockets today.
Is there a discussion? Chair recognizes Representative Kaufman.
Mr. Speaker, I would question whether this amendment is germane.
Representative Kaufman, your point is well taken. The chair recognizes Representative Wickton.
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules immediately and to consider Amendment H1108 and request a division in record.
Representative Wickton moves for immediate consideration of Amendment H1108. Requested division record. Second by Representative Converse. Is now a record roll call vote. Clerk, open machine and see your vote. Holt votes no. Bowden votes no. Jones votes no. Have you all now voted? Clerk, close the machine. The House pay attention to results of vote. Those voting aye, 33. Those voting no, 65. Absent or not voting, 2. The motion has failed. That disposes of all amendments. We are now on discussion on Senate File 75. Chair recognizes Representative Zabner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the House. Representative Kaufman, will you yield for a question?
Will the gentleman yield?
We can't see each other when we do this, but yes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Kaufman, this bill moves Johnson, Blackhawk, and Story County from at-large supervisor districts to districted districts. Can you explain why you chose these 3 counties?
First and foremost, rampant constituent complaints. There is next to no rural representation in these 3 counties, and this bill gives it to them.
If there are so many people that are upset, I mean, currently there's a process by which people could collect petition signatures and bring it on the ballot. To your knowledge, has there been efforts in any of these 3 counties to collect petitions? And if so, why haven't they been able to get enough?
Representative Zabner, in my opinion, Ronald Reagan's ghost could be resurrected, and he would not still give rural representation in these areas. So whether or not there are petitions is irrelevant. The rural voice continues to get drowned out.
Thank you, Representative Kaufman. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, this is the most anti-democratic bill I have seen in my time here at the Capitol. This bill takes 3 counties and changes the rights of the people in those counties as compared to the other 99 counties in the state of Iowa. 3 counties. 99 counties today, voters have the right to self-determination. They can choose whether they want districts or not. Recently, Lynn County has changed their model twice through the model of having a petition that is signed by the voters and then bringing it on the ballot. To my knowledge, there has not even been petitions in these 3 counties where enough voters have said they want this to change. The question before you today is, why these 3 counties? There are other counties, Pottawatomie, Scott, Woodbury, that have similar populations to the 3 counties we're discussing today. They also have colleges in them. They're all on borders, and they have transient voters who move back and forth between Iowa, Nebraska, South Dakota, and Illinois. What is the difference between those 3 counties and Johnson, Blackhawk, and Story County, Johnson, Blackhawk, and Story elect Democrats more often than they elect Republicans. They are being targeted. This is a blatant political effort to change who is elected in these counties, to take down supervisors who have been elected by the voters. The only people who should decide who are the supervisors of these three counties should be the voters there who are eligible to participate in elections.
Chair recognizes Representative Wilburn.
Good afternoon, Mr. Speaker. Good afternoon, members of the House. I hadn't intended on speaking on this, but since Story County was mentioned, I did want to bring to the members' attention my predecessor for this seat left because a Republican-elected Story County supervisor left his job after being elected by the citizens of Story County and representing rural Story County, was offered a job at the research park at Iowa State. And subsequently, a Democrat was elected. There will be some other bills here today, and we've been reminded that elections have consequences. And so, therefore, I would ask you to resist this, the possibility for representation by the majority party, by Republicans in Story County is alive and well as an opportunity. In fact, I just had a visit from a state senator who represents part of Story County, Senator Warmy, who is a Republican. So this is not needed, and I would ask you to heed the words of some of your colleagues that elections have consequences. Let the folks at the local level decide this.
Chair recognizes Representative Levin.
Thank you, Speaker, and thank you, colleagues of the House. This bill, to my mind, purely creates an inequitable system. It says that the voters in 3 counties don't get to make the decisions that the voters in the other 96 counties get to make. That's not why I stood up today, because I think that point has already been made admirably. I stood up because I wanted to bring a few numbers to the conversation. The number 154,881 and the number 62,214. There are 62,000, as of 2023, there are 62,214 rural members of the population in Johnson County, where I reside, and there are 154,881 total people in Johnson County population. Interesting thing about the current 5 board county supervisors in Johnson County is that 2 of those 5 members of the Board of Supervisors are from rural Johnson County. And when you do the math, when you divide 62,214 by 154,881, it turns out that the rural population of Johnson County, Iowa, is in fact 40.1%. And the Board of Supervisors is 40% rural representation. So let's talk about the real issue in this bill. It's not about whether the folks are from rural Iowa. It's about what letters next to their name when they register to vote. Please resist this bill that takes self-determination away from 3 counties, making an inequitable system across our state.
Chair recognizes Representative Lawler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House. At-large voting may appear to be neutral, but in practice it is often a tool used to disenfranchise minorities. In at-large systems, the majority wins every seat in every local election, even if a minority community makes up a large share of the population. The classic example of this is the Jim Crow era of the American South. Even though black Americans made up a significant portion of the population, from 30 to 50%, they couldn't win a single election in at-large systems. This is exactly what's happened in my home county of Johnson County. In the case of Johnson County, the dominant majority is the urban population. The minority is the rural and small town population. The urban majority wins every seat every time in local elections using its at-large system. The second well-known problem with at-large districts is that they eliminate geographic representation. All the power centralizes. Huge areas of a district that has at-large elections have no representation. This, too, is exactly what has happened in Johnson County. For years, Johnson County supervisors have almost all been from the small urban core at the center of our county. The final problem with at-large districts, and ultimately the main problem, is a natural result of the first two. When local officials come from the same group and the same neighborhoods, they are unresponsive to the concerns of the minority. Why? Because to hang on to their power, they don't have to respond to the minority. The at-large voting system protects them from being held accountable. So why does this urban majority, rural minority divide matter? Well, think of what a Board of Supervisors does. It sets policy for rural law enforcement. It sets property taxes for rural areas. It decides whether or not to repair rural roads and bridges. It oversees rural land management. In Johnson County, the board imposes what it calls village plans on small rural communities. Well, these are the most important issues for rural residents, and county supervisors rule on all of them. Having a board of supervisors that is really just another urban city council is incredibly unfair to rural and small town citizens. And in Johnson County, there are about 40,000 rural and small town citizens. That's a population that is bigger than every district that we represent here. Denying 40,000 people representation on the Board of Supervisors is incredibly unfair. This is not merely theoretical. This is the frustration I hear over and over in rural and small-town Johnson County. The supervisors simply do not respond or listen to their concerns. So, it's time for the large rural minority in these counties to finally have a voice in county politics, to have a voice with regard to their rural law enforcement, their rural roads, their rural taxes, and their rural communities. I encourage my colleagues to vote for the bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Chair recognizes Representative Barker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, I'd also like to speak on this bill a little bit. I would never support a piece of legislation that I felt would disenfranchise our young people. I got my start in activism and in advocacy on the campus of the University of Iowa. I've mentored countless Iowa State students, several of which are seated in this body. I helped found an organization statewide that helps get young people active in our political process. But when I was out door knocking for this seat, the number one thing I heard from my constituents above AEAs, above property taxes, above everything else we talk about, is they don't feel like their votes matter in county government. They feel like they're outvoted by people on the campus that couldn't even tell you what a county supervisor does. These are rural voters that are focused on things like secondary roads and bridges, like septic policy, what they feel is excessive restriction on their own property use. It's much different than the priorities that you're going to hear when you're around the campus. So this is about making sure that everyone in the county feels like there's somebody responsive to their needs and they get to vote for things that they would prioritize. The bill ensures local control by making sure decision-making takes place even closer to the people that are utilizing those county services, and I would ask the body to vote aye.
Chair recognizes Representative Kressig.
Thank you. And, I remember a couple of years back, there was a representative in the Republican caucus, Dave Deal, that had basically the similar bill. And it did not move forward. But here's the issue. In my years in this building, I've been here 21 years, I have had interaction with rural people in Black Hawk County, because that's where I live, who have never complained to me about this issue. And secondly, if you talk to people that are Board of Supervisors in Black Hawk County, I don't see how they can't say that they're not supporting their constituents, because they are. They're working tirelessly to make sure all of the people in Black Hawk County, not just the farmers, people of color, people with disability, all those people have concerns or issues, and the Board of Supervisors are reaching out. And, you know, to say that they're not being represented is just utterly ridiculous. This bill is terrible, and I guarantee you, I'll have a red light up by my name. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Representative Jacoby.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Kaufman yield to one question?
Will the representative yield?
Why just one?
You're in order.
You mentioned you heard from rampant people or rampant number of people.
Mm-hmm.
Could you put a number on rampant?
Hundreds.
Is that 100, 900, 1,100?
Beneath 999 and above 1.
Thank you. Sometimes we use words that aren't quantified, and that's interesting to me. Representative Lawler, will you yield?
The representative yield.
Sure.
You're in order.
Thank you, sir. We share a county. I think we may share a school district.
I don't believe so. Which school district?
Iowa City West?
I don't represent anyone in that district.
Oh, okay. Actually, you do with people that transfer in. And I'll help you. I can help you with that a little later.
That's true. There might be some open enrollees.
Yes, there's a good number of open enrollees.
But I don't think they can vote for you. I don't think they're in your district.
Help me with this. If I understood you correctly, the minority in your district is not getting any representation in Johnson County.
They've told me that many times.
Okay. But you're elected.
I'm not on the Board of Supervisors.
But you're elected. You're an elected official.
We're talking about the Board of Supervisors. But to answer your question, yes.
We're talking about thank you, Representative. It's interesting discussion because you indeed do represent people in Johnson County, the county that you say are not represented. Representative Barker, will you yield?
Will the gentleman yield?
Yes.
You're in order.
Yeah, I'm intrigued. I'm glad that you did the work with the University of Iowa students and Iowa State students. Isn't this bill discouraging college students from voting?
No, they would still have districts on the Board of Supervisors.
They would be able to vote for the supervisors then.
Correct. They would still have a vote for a representative on the Board of Supervisors.
Okay, and then maybe I misunderstood why, because I was listening when you spoke. Why do you feel this need for change?
Because those outside of the campus feel they do not have a vote on the Board of Supervisors.
Okay, and is the assumption that every single person outside of campus, every single person that lives in a rural district, every single person that's not under urban MSA is a Republican?
No.
Thank you, sir. It was mentioned about Jim Crow laws. It's been mentioned before about having a test whether or not you can vote. It's been mentioned that the minority doesn't have a voice. Well, guess what? I understand that shit. Here we go, other counties telling the three populous and popular counties, I might add, because I would bet that 96 of the counties that are represented here have visited these three counties. And I'm here to tell you, these three counties will not be visiting yours. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Representative Crokin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the House. I can accept many of the arguments being offered by the majority here today, and I do see the wisdom of one vote, one voice. What I don't understand is why this only applies to counties in which there are Regents universities. If this is true for some counties, why isn't it true for all counties? For example, Scott County is 80% urban, and yet our Board of Supervisors is overwhelmingly Republican and managed by rural voices. So all of the assertions that have been made are only selectively true. If we want to maintain our integrity, we need to make a decision that is statewide, not selectively applied for political advantage. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Representative Abner for the second time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to address one more argument that's been made about people who don't feel represented on their boards of supervisors. The city of Waukee came to the subcommittee for this bill, and they said Waukee would love to have a representative on the Dallas County Board of Supervisors. Now, why is Waukee not included? Why is Dallas County and Waukee not included in this bill? Simple reason: Waukee would send a Democrat to the Board of Supervisors. There are, in most elections, large numbers of people whose preferred candidate loses. That's called democracy. For members of the majority party in this chamber to pretend that they care about the rights of the minority is laughable. I ask you to oppose this bill, like I know you would oppose any kind of federal legislation from a Democrat that would change how Iowa elected our representatives. It's anti-democratic, it's wrong, and it's singling out 3 counties because they send Democrats to their Board of Supervisors. Vote no.
Seeing no further discussion, the chair recognizes Representative Kaufman for closing remarks on Senate File 75.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House. Representative Zabner, in my opinion, I heard you say that we are taking away and changing rights with this bill. In my opinion, that's intellectual calisthenics, and it's really difficult for me to follow. The current system is a system for some that is voter suppression. I am against voter suppression. I'm sorry that some of you may see this, in my opinion, through a partisan lens. This is not about partisan politics. This is about making sure that all votes count, including those votes in the rural areas. Mr. Speaker, I move the bill.
Representative Kaufman moves Senate File 75 be read last time placed on its passes. There are objections. Hearing none, the clerk will read.
Senate File 75, a bill for an act relating to county supervisors concerning county supervisor representation plans and county supervisor vacancies and included in effective date provisions being enacted by the General Assembly of the State of Iowa.
Question: How shall the bill pass? All in favor is passed, vote aye. Those opposed, vote no. The clerk will open the machine and see your vote. Bain votes aye. Moore of Scott votes aye. Sorensen votes aye. Momsen votes aye. Bowden votes aye. Lundgren votes aye. Have you all now voted? Clerk close the machine. The House may attend to results of the vote. Those voting aye 65, those voting no 32, absent not voting 3. The bill received a constitutional majority is declared to pass the House. Their objection to the title. Chair hears none. The title is agreed to. Chair recognizes Representative Moore for opening Moore of Cass for opening remarks on House File 722.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the House. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to substitute Senate File 603, which is identical to House File 722.
Are there objections? Hearing none, so ordered. Chair recognizes Representative Moore for opening remarks on Senate File 603.
Ladies and gentlemen of the House, Senate File 603 is a Department of Workforce Code Updates bill. It removes the requirement for Department of Workforce Development to administer a statewide employment skills assessment. It repeals several programs, including Iowa Conservation Corps and Workforce Investment Program. It transfers the responsibility for compiling annual reports on workforce training programs from the Department of Workforce Development to the College of Student Aid Commission. It modifies the definition of taxable wages for unemployment insurance to include only wages paid in Iowa, and it clarifies that local workforce development plans must comply with current federal workforce laws. This bill, Senate File 603, in the House passed through committee 17-0. In the Senate, it passed 48-0. Those are my opening comments, and there are amendments.
Will the clerk call up the First Amendment?
H1106 by Kaufman of Cedar.
Chair recognizes Representative Kaufman for opening remarks. Amendment H1106.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, this amendment is an attempt to subvert what I would call removing the intent and the spirit of the law when it comes to bidding. That concludes my opening comments, and I believe there are additional amendments.
There are amendments to the amendment. Will the clerk call up the First Amendment?
H1116 by Cooling of Lynn.
Chair recognizes Representative Cooling for opening remarks. Amendment H1116.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the House. This amendment 1116 would add into, as a secondary, add into Representative Kaufman's amendment, exempting federally funded projects. In this state, we have right now billions and billions of dollars coming in from the federal government to fund projects in the state. And these projects that have federal money on them are also public projects. There are a few in Lynn County where I reside and many throughout the state. This amendment would take away a lot of the ability for our local governments to receive these funds, because these funds do require apprenticeship language. They have requirements on the number of apprentices that are on the project, and that those apprentices be registered with the Department of Labor. And this amendment would make it so those federally funded projects would be exempted from the requirements of this amendment.
Is there discussion? Chair recognizes Representative Kaufman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Cooling, I appreciate your intent, but this obviously deviates from the intent of my amendments. I would recommend voting no on the amendment to the amendment.
Seeing no further discussion, the chair recognizes Representative Cooling for closing remarks. Amendment H1116.
Thank you again, Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House. Representative Kaufman, it is disappointing to hear that this would go against your intent with your amendment. I would think the intent of the state government, in my opinion, would be to encourage apprenticeships, to make sure that folks have an opportunity to get into the building trades where they're much needed workers and folks to have the opportunity to have a good paying job. As I went through a union electrical apprenticeship. And this, what is sad is if your intent is to exclude projects that are funded by federal money to make it so our local governments cannot receive that federal money in building their public projects is disappointing. And I would ask the body for a division record, and I move the amendment.
Representative Cooling moves amendment H1116, requests a division record, second by Representative Conference. Is now a record roll call vote. The clerk will open the machine and see your vote. James votes aye. Myra Polk votes aye. Lundgren votes no. Barker votes no. Jones votes no. Have you all now voted? Clerk close the machine. The House may attention results of the vote. Those voting aye, 33. Those voting no, 65. Absent or not voting 2. The amendment has failed. Will the clerk call up the next amendment?
H1115 by Cooling of Lynn.
Chair recognizes Representative Cooling for opening remarks on amendment H1115.
Thank you again, Mr. Speaker. Good afternoon again, ladies and gentlemen of the House. H1115 is a secondary amendment to Representative Kaufman's amendment that would require a state, agency, or political subdivision shall purchase steel that was manufactured in the United States. I think this is a great secondary amendment and something that we can all support because we love U.S. Steel and we love American jobs. We want to make those opportunities available to folks in our country.
Is there discussion? The chair recognizes Representative Kaufman.
Mr. Speaker, I would question whether this amendment is germane.
Representative Kaufman, Representative Cooling, approach well. Representative Kaufman, your point is well taken. The chair recognizes Representative Cooling for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, I would ask for a motion to immediately consider H1115 and ask for a division in record.
Representative Cooling requests to immediately move Amendment H1115, request division of record. Second by Representative Conference. Now a record roll call vote. Court machine, see your vote. Hayes votes no. Barker votes no. Lundgren votes no. Moore of Scott votes no. Have you all now voted? Clerk close machine. The House pay attention to results of the vote. Those voting aye, 33. Those voting no, 64. Absent or not voting 3. The motion has failed. Clerk, call up the next amendment.
H1117 by Cooling of Lynn.
Chair recognizes Representative Cooling for Amendment H1117.
Thank you again, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, this amendment, H1117, would allow, relates to the recapture of tax expenditures dispersed by departments of the state to business that violate child labor laws. So this would allow state and local governments to recapture state money and taxpayers' money and incentives from builders, developers, and folks that violate child labor provisions in state code. This is a good responsibility, secondary to Representative Kaufman's amendment to make sure that our state money is not used to exploit child workers in the state.
Is there discussion? The chair recognizes Representative Kaufman.
Mr. Speaker, I would question whether this amendment is germane.
Will the representatives approach well? Representative Kaufman, your point is well taken. The chair recognizes Representative Cooling for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you again, ladies and gentlemen of the House. I would ask for immediate suspension of the rules for consideration of Amendment H1117, and I would request a division of record.
Representative Cooling moves to immediately consider Amendment H1117. Request a division of record. Second by Representative Converse. Is now a record roll call vote. The clerk vote machine, see your vote. Deacon votes no. Moore of Scott votes no. Jurdy votes aye. Hayes votes no. Wolf votes no. Momsen votes no. Barker votes no. Lundgren votes no. Have you all now voted? Clerk, close the machine. The House may tentative results of the vote. Those voting aye, 32. Those voting no, 63. Absent not voting 5. The motion has failed. That disposes of the amendments to the amendment. We are now on Amendment H1106. Is there discussion? Chair recognizes Representative Sheets.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the House. You're going to hear me say something today that I would rarely say, and you might be a little surprised. I'm going to thank Representative Kaufman for bringing this amendment forward. And the reason I'm thanking him is because Representative Kaufman, by bringing this amendment forward, is really putting on display the true intentions of the majority party and the Republican Party.
State your point.
Rule 10, questions and motives.
Will Representative Winchittle, Sheets, and Converse approach well? Representative Winchell, your point is well taken. Representative Sheets, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What this amendment is doing is showing the people of Iowa that the Republican Party does not have the interests of working people, as it has claimed for many months now. And not just Representative Kaufman. We've heard over and over from the presidential level on down to the local level that the Republican Party is the party of working people. And why I was thanking Representative Kaufman is because this is showing the people of Iowa that is not the case. There are people now in this chamber from the majority party who have now publicly run on the support of having union support, having workers support their campaign. This amendment is a slap in the face to those workers. Dropped in the last second of this bill that was previously a non-controversial bill that passed unanimously out of the Labor Committee, we are once again seeing last-minute amendments that target the working people of Iowa. So all that I ask is for the people of Iowa to have their eyes open as to what the real agenda of the Republican Party is. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Representative McBurney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to call into question the germaneness of the amendment.
The representative questions whether this amendment is germane. Your point is well taken. The chair recognizes Representative Kaufman for a motion.
Speaker, I would ask for a motion to immediately suspend the rules in consideration of this amendment.
Representative Kaufman moves for immediate consideration of Amendment H1106. All those in favor shall say aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do it. Representative Converse, please, and Representative Winchell, will please approach well. Representative Kaufman moves to immediately consider Amendment H1106. The clerk will open the machine and see if you vote. This not. To consider the amendment. James votes no. Zabner votes no. Olson opposed votes no. Have you all now voted? Those voting aye 58, those voting no 34, absent not voting 8. Motion prevails. Yeah, we're now on discussion of the amendment H1106. Chair recognizes Representative Cooling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen of the House. I rise in opposition to this amendment. I think, limiting state and local governments to be able to have local people do their work rather than this amendment, I believe, would allow and prioritize out-of-state people to do the work. That would lead to a lesser product than that could be built by in-state Iowans and Iowa business. It will also, in my opinion, lead to safety hazards, workplace hazards, not allowing the good wages that Iowa workers, and would allow for low-wage, out-of-state workers to work on our projects with this amendment. I would ask if Representative Blum would yield to a few questions.
Will the representative yield?
I refer the representative to the bill manager. Thank you.
Representative is not going to yield at this point in time. Representative Cooling.
All right. No problem. That's fine. I was going to ask a colleague and a union brother of mine what he thought this bill would do as far as somebody who builds things, as I do in our state, and the way that this amendment would target themselves and their coworkers. But we'll answer those questions at another time, possibly. So at this time, I would ask the body to resist this amendment, make sure that we don't clench defeat from the jaws of victory that was a clean bill that came out of labor unanimously, and take a different direction with the overall bill.
Seeing no, the chair recognizes Representative Gosa.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good afternoon, Mr. Speaker. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the House. I wasn't going to say anything, but being a third-generation union member, I feel this is a direct attack on me and my family. My son is a newly apprenticed second year with the Iron Workers local back home. I've worked in the construction industry my entire career, and I can't tell you how much it frustrates me to drive around to different projects and see all these out-of-town contractors. And what this is doing is this is ensuring that we are not putting our people to work. It's truly dissatisfying to me to stand here and have to even advocate for this stuff. We always talk about our constituents and things like that, but here we are doing things to disenfranchise them. I challenge any one of you, when you're done here today, drive by any job site, and I guarantee you will see at least a half a dozen vehicles with Texas plates, because they are way cheaper labor. But hey, let them come on in and take our jobs. Now, from being an elected official and on a school board, I want to tell you, when you hire contractors that do not have apprenticeship programs and you have people doing these jobs, go look at the work. It is very substandard. And guess what? They're paying for it multiple times, because then you got to have somebody else come in and fix it. Or the equipment is running harder and they have to replace that, and it costs a lot more money on the long run. I worked in 08 in the University of Iowa powerhouse during the flood. They brought in some contractors from out of town. They did a bunch of that work while we were down in the tunnels with all the dead fish and everything else. And guess what? We had to go back and fix that work. They were bringing people in by the busloads every week. And you know what? It just wound up costing them more money. So I take it personally. Again, being a third generation, this is something that my family has done. We're very vested in it. My son did not want to be a fourth generation. He wanted to be an iron worker because he wanted to help build America. But now he's going to have to do that in other states because, again, we're just at a race to the bottom. So I wasn't going to say anything, but I had to, just because this is a shot at my livelihood, and I take that very personally. Thank you again, Mr. Speaker.
Seeing no further discussion, the chair recognizes Representative Kaufman for closing remarks, Amendment H1106.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, I have a couple of wild announcements about this amendment. Shockingly, not everyone is involved with a union. People that are not in unions are also working people. People that are not in unions are not rampant, substandard, poor reflectors of work. But thank you for what is, in my opinion, insulting 90% of the workers, 90% of the carpenters, 90% of the working class individuals that I know I can speak for them when I say they find your comments to be blatantly offensive. Belonging to a union is a great thing. Guess what? They can still bid on these contracts. They just can't have a local entity, the city of Des Moines, decide that they're a licensing entity. They're not. They can still bid on these contracts. They just can't have a local city, the city of Des Moines, thinking they're the legislature. They're not. In 2017, we prohibited these kind of attachments in order to bid on legislation. Don't listen to the hysterics, or what is, in my opinion, hysterics. This does not remove the ability of union members to bid on these. It simply removes the requirement that they get all of the bidding. 90% of the working men and women in this state in the construction industry are not union. I stand with them. I stand against insulting them. And Mr. Speaker, I move the amendment.
Representative Representative Kaufman moves Amendment H1106. There's record roll call vote has been requested by Representative Confer, second by Representative Mattson. This is now a record roll call vote. All those in favor vote aye. Those opposed vote no. Clerk will machine see your vote. James votes no. Zabner votes no. Rinker votes aye. Dunwell votes aye. Lundgren votes aye. Barker votes aye. Bloomingdale votes aye. Meyer of Webster votes aye. Jones votes aye. Have you all now voted? Clerk close the machine. The House pay attention to results of the vote. Those voting aye, 64. Those voting no, 34. Absent or not voting 2. The amendment has been adopted. That disposes of all amendments. We are now on Senate File 603 as amended. Is there further discussion? The Chair recognizes Representative McBurney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen of the House. I just want to say, Representative Moore, I appreciate you working with myself and our other member on the subcommittee to push this bill forward. I apologize that unfortunately it appears as though some non-germane comments or additions were added to it through an amendment that I don't think any of us really appreciated. What I will say is it's blatantly obvious that this amendment, as this now amended bill, is set up to target specific cities. It's not in any way intended to help out the workforce across the state of Iowa. We just heard comments about don't listen to the hysterics. Well, I don't have to give you hysterics. I can give you germane examples coming from the city of Urbandale, where I was served on the city council, and because of that law that was passed in 2017, we were required to go with the lowest responsible bidder, which there is no definition in Iowa code for responsible or responsive. And it wound up that we ended up giving our fire department contract to a contractor who did substandard work, and it cost us nearly quadruple what it should have cost had we gone with someone who we could actually request licensing from. This isn't just about unions. It's not just about apprenticeships. It's about ensuring that our public buildings are being built and ran by licensed individuals. As this stands today, we cannot be sure of the people that are going into our buildings. When a school board bids out a contract, we cannot ensure the workers that are going into those schools are good actors. The majority party talks about how they want to fight against illegal immigration. They want to fight against all these bad actors who are coming into the country and stealing jobs. Well, how are we supposed to know that? We can't request documentation for it. So the number one largest employer across the state of Iowa, all of our municipalities, our counties, our school boards, with all the billions of dollars of construction that are going on, and we can't request documentation for their workers. Why? What are they trying to hide? The other thing I'd like to point out is the same people who stand here and say, I stand with the 95% of Iowans or the 90% of Iowans, are also the same people who are taking money from the unions. Are you giving that money back?
State your point.
Rule 10, Mr. Speaker, questioning motives, impugning character.
Representative Winchell, Representative McBurney, and Representative Conference approach well. Representative Winchell, your point is well taken. Representative McBurney has 7 minutes remaining.
I'll just close with these comments. Representative Moore, I do appreciate you reaching out to me on this bill, working with me on this bill to ensure that the original version of this bill was moving Iowa forward. However, in its current amended state, I ask that the members of this body vote no. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Representative Brown Powers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to propose a question as I sit here and listen to debate today. Last week, we worked hard to keep Iowa students here in the state of Iowa. Today, we work hard to kick Iowa workers out of Iowa. Just a thought, folks.
Chair recognizes Representative Cooling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you again, ladies and gentlemen of the House. I wouldn't have planned on speaking on this bill today when it moved from subcommittee into committee where it had unanimous passage out of committee. I want to thank the chair, Representative Kenneth McCullough, for that, and the rest of my caucus in committee for moving this bill along to the floor to then today have it amended into a pretty terrible bill for Iowa, in my opinion. And with that, I would ask that Representative T. Moore yield for just a few questions on the process that it took through the legislature to get to the floor.
Representative Moore, yield.
I'll yield.
You're in order.
Thank you, Representative. You were on the subcommittee for this bill, is that right?
That is correct.
Was there anyone at the subcommittee, as far as builders, developers, local governments, anyone asking for an amendment to this bill to incentivize out-of-state workers, substandard building, anything like that?
There was not.
I didn't think so. And then anyone through the process in the committee ask for a amendment to the bill that you were the floor manager on to do anything of this sort, or was this a pretty clean conversation through the process?
Oh, no, we had issues with the bill that had to be taken care of, and they were taken care of before the bill came to committee.
Yeah, okay, so we took care of some of those in committee as far as technicals and things like that, but nothing like the currently amended version of the bill that's before us here on the floor now?
I would say no.
Okay. I appreciate you answering a couple questions. Thank you. So now that we can see, this original bill was a bill that was being worked out. It was a Department of Workforce Development bill. It moved through the process. It got the fixes it needed in committee and was passed out unanimously.
Discussion. The chair recognizes Representative Moore of Casper. Close remarks on Senate File 603.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, I would like to thank Representative McBurney and Representative Weldon for their work on this with me. I appreciated it in getting the workforce bill done, and with that, I finally moved this bill.
Representative Moore moves bill be read for the last time and placed on its passage. There are objections? Hearing none, the clerk will read.
Senate File 603, a bill for an act relating to workforce compensation and training, unemployment insurance, and other functions and programs of the Department of Workforce Development and the Department of Workforce Development Board and local government entities, and including effective date provisions being enacted by the General Assembly of the State of Iowa.
Question: How shall the bill pass? All in favor of passage vote aye. Those opposed vote no. The clerk will machine see your vote. Dunwell votes aye. Bloomingdale votes aye. James votes no. Have you all now voted? Clerk, close the machine. The House will pay attention to results of the vote. Those voting aye, 62. Those voting no, 34. Absent not voting for. Bill having received a constitutional majority is declared to pass the House. The objection to the title. The chair hears none. The title is agreed to. The chair recognizes Representative Winchittle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, at this time, please immediately message the following bills to the Senate, Senate File 705 and 603.
Are there objections? Hearing none, so ordered. Chair recognizes Representative Winchell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At this time, please recognize Representative Shipley for House File 522, 782, 870. Representative Gelbach for House File 190 and 784. Representative Holt for House File 269, 401. Representative Stone for House File 856. Representative John Wills for House File 295. Representative Collins for House File 437, 440. Representative Wheeler for House File 787. And Representative Hayes for House File 865.
Chair recognizes Representative Shipley for remarks on House File 522.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the Iowa House, House File 522 adds definition to our Therapeutic Classroom Grant Program. Therapeutic classrooms were created in 2020 to help ensure a student's behavioral needs will not interfere with the learning environment of other students. Feedback on this funding has been positive. This bill takes some of the ideas we heard from school districts and expands them to make sure that the state of Iowa is exploring every avenue available in supporting students with behavioral changes. Those are my opening remarks. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Is there a discussion? The chair recognizes Representative Levin.
Thank you, Speaker, and thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and colleagues of the House. I rise with many questions about this bill. I attended the subcommittee, I spoke to my questions in committee, and yet they still remain unanswered. I was pleased to see the bill amended from a shall to a may, and yet still I question, why is this guidance coming from the legislature and not from the Department of Education? That's my first question. My second question is, at what point in a student's need of a therapeutic classroom are we providing them with mineral supplementation, vitamin D and vitamin K2? Is parental consent being attained before we are giving supplements, vitamins, minerals, full-fat dairy products, beef and bacon to students? At what point in the process of a student needing a therapeutic classroom are we assessing the macronutritional needs of the student? Is it before or after they come down from the rage that brought them into the therapeutic classroom in the first place? Because speaking as someone who has taught in a school that utilizes therapeutic classroom setting, generally speaking, when a student needs that space, is not the appropriate time to be assessing their macronutritional needs. It's the appropriate time to be giving them opportunities to process their feelings without hurting themselves or others. Our therapeutic classroom settings are vitally important. They are a great way of addressing some of the behavioral challenges that our teachers and our district employees are dealing with on a moment-to-moment basis. And handing over this list of extremely prescriptive and, in my opinion, oddly specific recommendations does not suggest an understanding of the actual process that a school employee is going through when trying to de-escalate a student who is in a heightened state of emotion. Specifically, though, my biggest concern with this bill is the aspect of parental consent. Are we feeding stuff to kids without talking to their parents first? Because that emotional distress is not always something that can be planned, right? When we have moments of emotional distress, we don't generally talk to our parents first and let them know that we're going to be feeling that way, that we're going to be having an outburst in class. And so are we then directing the schools to do these things, to provide supplements, to provide foods, to provide access to the out of doors without permission from the parents? I have a lot of questions, and overall, I think this is a bad idea to be coming from this body, particularly at this time. Please consider voting no on this bill.
Seeing no further discussion, the chair recognizes Representative Shipley for closing remarks on House File 522.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and ladies and gentlemen of the Iowa House. I guess the first thing I'll say is I would direct anyone who's interested in this bill to the Department of Education website. While the term is therapeutic classroom, on the website it clearly shows school districts are applying this framework to school building-wide, district-wide. They want as many of their employees equipped to handle these behavioral needs of children. Again, these ideas might seem prescriptive to you, but they're really doing things that school districts are already doing. So again, a couple years ago with the Children's Behavioral Health Council, we heard a presentation from the Bettendorf School District that was successfully using dairy products like a cheese stick or a beef stick like a beef jerky to help kids through the process of managing their social, emotional, behavioral needs. So I guess I'm just a little frustrated. I hope we can all be as informed as possible. But the other point, this is a Republican bill. Parental consent is a given. That is an assumption that when our public schools are operating, they're going to do everything that they can to ensure the parents are included in that process, and that parents are also the foremost support for a student who has special needs. So nothing in this bill changes that, and you know, because this is the Republican chamber, that absolutely we're prioritizing parental consent on anything that would happen in the school building. So those objections don't really make a lot of sense to me. I would encourage people to get more familiar with the program and how it's actually working out in school districts, because I think you'll find a lot of school districts are doing this already and having a lot of good success. For instance, I believe it's the Ottumwa School District just installed a new LED lighting system that's dynamic to adjust the frequency of the lighting throughout the school day. There's some interesting research that shows this is a good thing to do, and thankfully under this bill, the school district will be reimbursed from an expenditure for those light fixtures. So I think this is a great bill. House File 522 represents a significant step forward in ensuring that students with behavioral health needs are supported in their education. Mr. Speaker, I move the bill.
Representative Shipley moves House File 522 be read for the last time and placed on its passage. Are there objections? Hearing none, the clerk will read.
House File 522, a bill for an act relating to therapeutic classroom incentive programs by authorizing expenditures of money for certain nutritional items being enacted by the General Assembly of the State of Iowa.
Question now, shall the bill pass? All in favor is passed, vote aye. Those opposed, vote no. The clerk will open the machine, see your vote. Johnson and Polk votes no. Collins votes aye. Kniff McCullough votes aye. Bloomingdale votes aye. Wills of Wapello votes aye. Winchell votes aye. Rinker votes aye. Losey votes aye. Have you all now voted? Clerk close the machine. The House may attention results of the vote. Those voting aye 66, those voting no 31, absent or not voting 3. The bill received a constitutional majority. It is declared to pass the House. There are objections to the title. Chair hears none. The title is agreed to. Chair recognizes Representative Shipley for opening remarks on House File 782.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the Iowa House, House File 782 directs school districts in Iowa to adopt policy that would restrict a student from using their personal electronic devices during school instruction time. Mr. Speaker, there is an amendment.
Will the clerk call up the amendment?
H1103 by Mattson of Polk.
Chair recognizes Representative Mattson for opening remarks, Amendment H1103.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good afternoon, Mr. Speaker, and ladies and gentlemen of the House. I bring forward this amendment just to provide a little bit of clarity for school districts, especially those who have already enacted cell phone restriction policies that are working really well for them. And the amendment would simply take out the petition language, but also add on the language of, quote, an individual health plan, so that we can ensure that all students who have a legitimate physical or mental health reason can be included as needed. And these are my opening comments.
Is there a discussion? The chair recognizes Representative Shipley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the Iowa House, I appreciate the objective of the amendment. However, it is my belief that that objective is satisfied by the language in Section 2, Paragraph F of the bill, so I would ask the body to reject it.
Seeing no further discussion, the chair recognizes Representative Mattson for closing remarks, Amendment H1103.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Shipley, I appreciated our conversation on this bill as a whole and also on this amendment. I think it was a good conversation on the amendment in particular. I'm also glad to hear, based on your comments on the amendment, that the majority party confirms the intent of this bill as written is to give school boards final authority on whether or not a physical or mental health request is a legitimate medical reason. That's good to know in case my amendment is voted down. I'll still urge a yes just in case.
Representative Mattson moves Amendment H1103, requests a division of record, second by Representative Confers. This is now a record roll call vote. The clerk will open the machine, see your vote. Sexton votes no. Kniff McCullough votes no. Wills of Wapello votes no. Kressig votes aye. Bossman votes no. Bloomingdale votes no. Hora votes no. Winchell votes no. Have you all now voted? Clerk close machine. The House may attention results of the vote. Those voting aye, 31. Those voting no, 65. Absent not voting for. The motion has failed. That disposes of all amendments. We're now in discussion on House File 782. Chair recognizes Representative Mattson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and good afternoon again, ladies and gentlemen of the House. I served on the subcommittee for this bill, and I really appreciate the amount of work that went into everything from a really robust subcommittee conversation to working its way through the committee, including an amendment to take out some of the pieces that many of us were concerned about in the initial bill. I do think that it is reasonable for people to have differing views on the state's role on this issue. Many school districts, including my own, have already instituted a successful policy, and many more are likely to follow as a matter of course. That being said, I think we all know of the incredible distractions caused by cell phones and other electronic devices. I mean, we all have one, and we are constantly taking them out. Imagine your children doing that all the time. Oh, yep, you do. It happens. I believe that the evidence has shown that restrictions are making a difference, and for that reason, I will be voting yes. I think it's also important to recognize that this bill essentially it has been referred to as a floor as far as policies go. I think that's important. It gives a lot of leeway to local school districts to do what works for them. And again, I will encourage a yes on this bill.
Seeing no further discussion, the chair recognizes Representative Shipley for closing remarks on House File 782.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the Iowa House. I appreciate the positive discussion on this bill and the consensus we've reached that this is a good direction for the state of Iowa. It is my hope that the discussion and the acknowledgement that the proliferation and dependence on electronic and digital devices can and does often come with negative impacts on both adults and children. It's my hope this discussion continues into the future. I applaud the various school districts who have led the way on the issue, and especially the school districts like Des Moines and Ottumwa that have shared their success that they've seen in their school buildings so they can inspire others to follow suit. I'm most thankful for Governor Reynolds and her visionary leadership for bringing this bill forward and ensuring our state makes these much-needed policy changes. Lastly, I'm thankful for my subcommittee of Representative Hora and Representative Mattson. Mr. Speaker, I move the bill.
Representative Shipley moves House File 782 be read for the last time and placed on its passage. Are there objections? Hearing none, the clerk will read.
House File 782, a bill for an act relating to electronic devices in schools, including student access during instructional hours and school safety plans, and including effective date provisions being enacted by the General Assembly of the State of Iowa.
Question now, shall the bill pass? All in favor is passed, vote aye. Those opposed, vote no. The clerk will open the machine, see your vote. Bloomingdale votes aye. Sexton votes aye. Wills of Wapello votes aye. Kniff McCullough votes aye. Bossman votes aye. Winchell votes aye. Jones votes aye. Have you all now voted? Clerk close machine. The House by potential results of the vote. Those voting aye, 88. Those voting no, 9. Absent not voting 3. The bill received a constitutional majority. Is declared to pass the House. Their objection to the title. Chair hears none. The title is agreed to. Chair recognizes Representative Shipley for opening remarks on House File 870.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and ladies and gentlemen of the Iowa House. House File 870 adds a needed clarification to our school compulsory attendance law so that religious instruction is accommodated. This bill will ensure Iowa's public schools are in compliance with constitutional law. Mr. Speaker, there is an amendment.
Will the clerk call out the amendment?
H1097 by Shipley of Van Buren.
Chair recognizes Representative Shipley for opening remarks. Amendment H1097.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This amendment deletes the first few sections of the bill. It was determined that these sections go above and beyond in resolving the issues that we wish to resolve.
Is there a discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, the chair recognizes Representative Shipley moves Amendment H1097. All those in favor shall say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The amendment is adopted. That disposes of all amendments. We're now in discussion on House File 870. The chair recognizes Representative Kurth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, without the section about offering credit, this bill becomes a bill that I am happy to recommend a yes vote for. What it now does is it clarifies how many hours can be used for religious instruction and how that those hours will be documented. So I'm happy to be a yes.
Seeing no further discussion, the chair recognizes Representative Shipley for closing remarks on House File 870.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and ladies and gentlemen of the Iowa House. Thank you, everyone, or thank you, Representative Kurth, for valuing religious freedom, and I'll move the bill.
Representative Shipley moves House File 870 read for the last time, placed on its passage. Are there objections? Hearing none, the clerk will read.
House File 870, a bill for an act relating to students who attend a course in religion instruction that is provided by a private organization, including by modifying provisions related to compulsory education and chronic absenteeism, and allowing school district, charter schools, and innovation zone schools to adopt policies related to awarding academic credit for completion of a course in religious studies, being enacted by the General Assembly of the State of Iowa.
Question: How shall the bill pass? All in favor, pass shall vote aye. Those opposed, vote no. The clerk will machine receive your vote. Lundgren votes aye. Kniff McCullough votes aye. Wills of Wapello votes aye. Bossman votes aye. Winchell votes aye. Jones votes aye. James votes aye. Have you all now voted? Clerk, close the machine. House pay attention to results of vote. Those voting aye, 95. Those voting no, 2. Absent not voting 3. The bill has received a constitutional majority. Declared to pass the House. Their objection to the title. Chair hears none. The title is agreed to. Chair recognizes Representative Gelbach for opening remarks on House File 190.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the House. House File 190 simply lets online students who attend school online take the statewide summative test, which is currently called the ISAST, also online. We have a lot of these students that have medical issues and other needs when they have to travel, sometimes a great distance and expense, and stay overnight just to take the online test in an in-person setting. So this bill spells out a lot of different ways to monitor and proctor that exam, and it just lets online students take the test online. And Mr. Speaker, there's an amendment.
Will the clerk call up the amendment?
H1057 by Gilbach of Dallas.
Chair recognizes Representative Gelbach for opening remarks. Amendment H1057.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a clarifying amendment that just says that the assessment administrators may be employed by the school or designated by the school, and just clarifies that point in the bill.
Is there a discussion? Seeing none, Chair recognizes Representative Gelbach. Representative Gelbach moves Amendment H1057. All in favor shall say aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The amendment is adopted. That disposes of all amendments. We're now in discussion on House File 190. The chair recognizes Representative Kurth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House.
Gelbach moves Amendment.
This becomes a very good bill. It has to do with the assessment of online students, and we know that students do better in situations where they feel comfortable, and that's part of what this bill allows. Video observation is being done by an online proctor, and there's a limitation on the number of students that can be proctored at one time. It has to be 10 or fewer students. The benefit, taking a test in familiar surroundings, it also reduces for some the cost or the inconvenience of travel to a proctoring site. So I recommend a yes.
Seeing no further discussion, the chair recognizes Representative Gelbach for closing remarks on House File 190.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There was concern about a fiscal note on this, but the way we can get around this is if the students that are online students, they can just take the test a week later. We don't need a new test for these online students. I just wanted to address that concern. And with that, I move House File 190 as amended.
Representative Gelbach moves House File 190 be read for the last time and placed on its passage. Are there objections? Hearing none, the clerk will read.
House File 190, Bill for an Act relating to administration of the statewide summative assessment for student progress to students of online schools by school districts, accredited non-public schools, and charter schools being enacted by the General Assembly of the State of Iowa.
Question now, shall the bill pass? All in favor is passed, vote aye. Those opposed, vote no. The clerk will open the machine. See your vote. Young votes aye. Zabner votes no. Kenneth McCullough votes aye. Will Zawaplo votes aye. Fett votes aye. Bloomingdale votes aye. Baith votes aye. Have you all now voted? Clerk, close the machine. The House may tend to results of the vote. Those voting aye, 86. Those voting no, 11. Absent, not voting 3. The bill received 2 constitutional majorities. Declared to pass the House. There are objections to the title. Chair hears none. The title is agreed to. Chair recognizes Representative Gelbach for opening remarks on House File 784.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and good afternoon again, ladies and gentlemen of the House. House File 784, the Iowa Math Counts Act, aims to address Iowa's declining math performance, as highlighted by the 24 NAEP results this last year, showing Iowa ranking 30th in 4th grade math and 23rd in 8th grade math, down from its historically higher rankings. This bill requires schools to screen students in grades K through 6 at least 3 times per year to identify those struggling with math. This will be done with approved screeners from the Department of Education. The bill mandates targeted interventions and personalized math plans for students who need extra support, developed with input from the Department of Education. It provides educators with evidence-based strategies and tools to teach math effectively. It focuses on equipping teachers with professional development to implement research-backed instructional methods. It requires higher education institutions to mandate students in teacher prep programs complete mathematics methods coursework and demonstrate competency. And it also supplies parents with family-centered resources to support their children's math development at home. It commits state resources to bolster our math instruction, aligning with our literacy bill that we passed last year. And, Mr. Speaker, there are amendments.
Will the clerk call up the first amendment?
H1093 by Gelbach of Dallas.
Chair recognizes Representative Gelbach for opening remarks, Amendment H1093.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This amendment simply puts in a date for the comprehensive state mathematics plan by the Department of Education. They're committed to doing this on July 1, 2025, and it also makes the rest of the bill effective upon enactment.
Is there a discussion? The chair recognizes Representative Kurth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's good that we're giving the schools some upfront time to prepare for this, and so making the enactment for Department of Education to start working on and getting the information out is a positive thing. I encourage a yes vote.
Is there seeing no further discussion, the chair recognizes Representative Gelbach for closing remarks, Amendment H1093.
You also reiterate the department is committed to getting this done, and with that, I move the amendment.
Representative Gelbach moves Amendment H1093. All in favor shall say aye. Aye. Those opposed will vote no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The amendment is adopted. Will clerk call up the next amendment?
H1079 by Kurth of Scott.
Chair recognizes Representative Kurth for opening remarks, Amendment H1079.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. All this bill does, or all this amendment does, is delay the implementation for the schools themselves until the school year of 26-27. That would give them enough time to do the training, to get the materials and things in order. I recommend giving the schools a little bit more time. Please vote yes on this amendment.
Is there discussion? The chair recognizes Representative Gelbach.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The department and everyone is on board with getting these materials out, and I think we've already seen results from our last year's literacy bill, and I don't think we need to wait a year on this, and so with that, I urge my caucus to resist the amendment.
Seeing no further discussion, the chair recognizes Representative Kurth for closing remarks, Amendment H1079.
Again, this bill has a lot of moving parts. We don't know how long it's going to take DE to get all the information out to the schools and how long it's going to take for the schools to do the training and the other kind of preparations that are necessary to make this a good start. Please vote no. Or, excuse me, please vote yes on this.
Representative Kurth moves Amendment H1079. Representative Kahn first requested division record, second by Representative Mattson. This is now a record roll call vote. Will the clerk open the machine and receive your vote? Kaufman votes no. Bloomingdale votes no. Jones votes no. Wills Waplow votes no. Fett votes no. Kniff McCullough votes no. Have you all now voted? Clerk, close the machine. The House by 10 results vote. Those voting aye, 31. Those voting no, 65. Absent or not voting for. The amendment has failed. That disposes of all amendments. We are now on discussion on House File 784. Is there further discussion? Chair recognizes Representative Kurth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Here's the good news. Guess what? The House is not on fire. This is not the emergency that we're being led to believe that it is. We're told that our fourth graders fell from 7th place to 30th place in the country, and that 8th graders fell from 15th place to 23 in the country. But here's the actual proof that we're not really in an emergency situation. The actual score for fourth graders declined from 240 to 237. That's 3 points. That's less than 1% of the actual grade total. And in 8th graders, it fell from 277 to 275. That's 2 points. That's less than 1 percentage point drop. So even though we're being told this is a horrible thing that we've just fallen, what it actually means is that many, many states are clustered very, very close together. And so our rank ended up being dropped just because we fell a little bit. So that's the good news. We're not in a really big emergency. There are some other concerns that I have about this bill. Testing happens frequently for those students who are considered below norm. Those students, or all students, will be assessed in math 3 times a year. But those students who are having problems will be then assessed every 2 weeks. Sometimes we over-test, and sometimes students become jaded by all the assessments that they're being given. We found that out earlier. The other thing is that this testing applies only to public schools. Why aren't we including non-public schools, charter schools, and innovation zone schools in this particular testing? School budgets are already stretched almost to the limit. Our teachers are being asked to do more for less, and this particular bill is asking them to do a whole lot more for less, including interventions with the families, extensive extra help for students, extra testing, extra grading, and so on and so forth. But we consider this math improvement so important that we're giving it zero extra money. There's no money being given for extra materials, no money being given for training, no money being given for these intensive interventions. What a deal. It's being put down as a state mandate, and the money has to come from the school's general fund. I was a math teacher. I think math is incredibly important, but I think this bill is taking a shotgun approach to a bill that needs to be more directed. And so I cannot support this bill. Yes, I know math is important. No, I don't think it's an emergency right now. But yes, we want to have our students do better. Is this the way to do it? I think we need to put some money where our mouths are, and I think we better take a better approach to making a good bill that will have a solid chance of making an improvement for our students.
Seeing no further discussion, the chair recognizes Representative Gelbach for closing remarks on House File 784.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill responds to Iowa's NAEP math scores, which, while above the national average, like Representative Kurth said, does reflect a significant drop in rankings since 2019, like she said, from 7th to 30th and for fourth graders and 15th to 23rd for eighth graders. It aims to reverse this trend and address these achievement gaps. This bill is prioritizing math education, ensuring Iowa students remain competitive both nationally and globally. Math proficiency is a proven indicator of future academic and career success, second only to early literacy. With 25% of Iowa's fourth graders not proficient, meaning not at or above basic proficiency in math on the current NAEP scores. This bill's early intervention sets students up for long-term achievement in STEM fields and beyond. By providing teachers with training and resources grounded in research, the bill ensures math instruction is effective and consistent across the state. This builds on Iowa's success in reading, where evidence-based methods are already lifting scores, as seen in our 2024 reading NAEP scores. While Iowa avoided steep drops in 2022 due to in-person instruction during the pandemic, its 2024 scores haven't returned to 2019 levels. This bill proactively prevents stagnation, pushing for recovery and improvement. The Iowa Math Counts Act is a targeted response to lagging math performance, aiming to restore Iowa's standing through early intervention, teacher support, and parental involvement. Lastly, I've personally seen in the almost 15 years I've worked with kids in math that if taught correctly and gaps are addressed early, kids can take off, boost their confidence, and set them up for success in all subjects, not just math. Teaching in a way that makes sense and with proven methods, without going a mile wide, inch deep, does work. Just passing a student on without addressing the cause of the problem is not the solution. So I'm optimistic that our schools in Iowa will once again rank near the top with the implementation of this bill. And lastly, I'll also point out my colleague, Representative Henderson, who's taught in the classroom for many more years than I have taught math, was a great help on this bill. And with that, I move House File 784.
Representative Gelbach moves House File 784 be read for the last time and placed on its passage. Are there objections? Hearing none, the clerk will read.
House File 784, a bill for an act relating to education, including by modifying provisions related to mathematics instruction and practitioner preparation programs and the duty of the Director of the Department of Education, including effective date provisions being enacted by the General Assembly of the State of Iowa.
Question on shall the bill pass? All in favor is passed. Vote aye. The opposed vote no. The clerk will open machine. See your vote. Nordman votes aye. Fett votes aye. Dunwell votes aye. Bowden votes aye. Sitzman votes aye. Jones votes aye. Have you all now voted? Clerk close machine. The House may attention results of the vote. Those voting aye 82, those voting no 15, absent or not voting 3. The bill received a constitutional majority is declared to pass the House. There are objections to the title. Chair hears none. The title is agreed to. Chair recognizes Representative Holt for opening remarks on House File 269.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the House. The Freedom from Indoctrination Act requires the Board of Regents to establish a policy that ensures that Regent universities do not require or incentivize students to take courses related to DEI and critical race theory as a condition to satisfy any academic degree program. There is an exception if the academic degree program title clearly establishes that the course of study is primarily focused on these issues. Further, the legislation stipulates that the Regents cannot require or incentivize faculty to apply or participate in DEI or CRT-related content as a condition of approval, designation, condition of faculty performance assessment, promotion, tenure, salary adjustment, or any other incentive. The bill authorizes any person to notify the Attorney General of a potential violation, and that the Attorney General may then bring an action against a Regent institution to ensure compliance with the law. The legislation would take effect beginning July 1st, 2026. Mr. Speaker, there are amendments.
Will the clerk call out the amendment? First amendment.
H1082 by Holt of Crawford.
Chair recognizes Representative Holt for opening remarks. Amendment H1082.
Thank you. This amendment was requested by the universities. It strikes line 15 through 22 on page 1. This was considered problematic language that might be interpreted too broadly. This language is removed and remaining paragraphs are renumbered. The Regents requested this, as I said, and the Regents are registered in favor of this legislation. This concludes my remarks on the amendment.
Is there discussion? The chair recognizes Representative Wilburn.
Good afternoon, Mr. Speaker, members of the House. I rise in support of H1082. I'm glad that the Regents did request this and point out some problems with this. Because as written, the notion that you can separate historical events apart from contemporary American society is impractical. It does not fully educate without having the context. Having this academic freedom, not freedom from indoctrination, having this academic freedom helps students understand how our communities work, as well as contemporary problems. Learning that the historical practice of redlining certain parts of a community, for example, helps people know why some neighborhoods have disappeared. Redlining, if you don't know, was the discriminatory practices where financial services, especially mortgages and insurance, are systematically denied or made inaccessible to residents of certain areas, often based on race or ethnicity, and leading to lasting economic disparities. Some of those economic disparities exist today. If you look into the history of Interstate 235 right here in Des Moines, if you didn't know, construction of that in the 1960s, particularly through the Center Street neighborhood, decimated a predominantly black-owned business district and displaced nearly 1,300 families, making worse the effects of pre-existing redlining policies. Another example of the rich diversity that Iowa represents is rural Iowa. Learning how poor farming practices in the 1930s led to the Dust Bowl in the Great Plains states. Overgrazing and intensive farming techniques depleted the soil's moisture and structure, making it vulnerable to erosion. This type of information helps students from rural and urban parts of Iowa know the importance of conservation practices, like what might be talked about in a classroom discussion, ag class at Iowa State. I ask you to support this amendment and not have a knee-jerk reaction to diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Seeing no further discussion on the amendment, Chair recognizes Representative Holt for closing remarks. Amendment H1082.
Thank you, Representative Wilburn, for your comments, and I simply move the amendment.
Representative Holt moves amendment H1082. All those in favor shall say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The amendment is adopted. Will the clerk call up the next amendment?
H1111 by Sharina Vassal-Polk.
Chair recognizes Representative Srinivas for opening remarks, Amendment H1111.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to hold my opening comments until after we address the secondary.
Will the clerk call up the next amendment?
H1114 by Srinivas of Pope.
Chair recognizes Representative Srinivas for opening remarks, Amendment H1114.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is just a corrective secondary.
Is there a discussion? The chair recognizes Representative Holt.
Thank you. I would concur with Senator Srinivas, and this is a correcting amendment, perfecting amendment, so I would urge the body to approve, vote for the amendment. Thank you.
Seeing no further discussion, Representative Srinivas moves Amendment H1114. All those in favor shall say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The amendment is adopted. We are now back on Amendment H1111. Go ahead with your opening comments, Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, friends and colleagues of the House. I want to tell you a story about my brother. As some of you might know, and some of you probably don't, I have an older brother. And growing up, he had an amazing superpower. He could convince my mother to do absolutely anything. So my mother, catching on to this game, quickly learned that in order to avoid having to say yes to things she didn't want to say yes to, she came up with a new answer. Ask Dad. And that worked really, really well for the first 5 years of my brother's life. And then along year 5 came along baby sister, and Dad was no longer a problem. But together we used our power to convince our parents for good. We got ourselves later bedtimes, we got a new puppy, we even got a new Super Nintendo. Yes, I am that old. But the real reason that this always sticks out to me, the fact that my brother taught us that we each had our own individual strengths that we could use together to build something better, to solve a problem, to move ahead, was because it celebrated each of our differences. And it looked at those differences and said, how can we move together through a challenge, the challenge being my parents in this situation, to get what we needed to get done? That lesson has stuck with me throughout my life. In fact, it's a lesson I use every single day in my profession as a physician. Every single day, I look to each patient that walks through the door, and I say, what is your individual story? What is it that makes you uniquely you? What are your differences that we need to highlight in order for you to be able to be your healthiest self and live the life that you deserve to live? And that's where diversity, equity, and inclusion is so important. There is some confusion over these definitions, so I want to give you the exact example of how this applies in the world of medicine, in the world of healthcare as we see it today in Iowa. Diversity is looking at those differences between us. So for instance, looking at Representative Goza and myself, you would see that he is a man and I am a woman. That is our differences, that is the diversity between us. Equity is enabling us, based on our differences, to be able to succeed. And so because Representative Goza is a man, he will need regular prostate checks. I don't as a woman. Since I'm a woman, I need regular cervical pap smears in order to make sure I stay my healthiest self. He doesn't. That's equity, acknowledging our differences so we can each succeed. And it is critical to the practice of medicine, to the practice of healthcare in our state. It comes in many forms. Let me give you a few other examples. When I see a patient come to me because they're having GI symptoms, we're not exactly sure what they are. But knowing their age or knowing their background, that can change the type of testing I want to do. For instance, I know East Asians are more likely to have stomach cancer, so it makes me want to do other procedures. Whereas people with Scandinavian descent, they're more likely to have gluten intolerance or celiac disease. It changes my diagnosis, it changes my approach. The same between man and woman, knowing whether you would have breast cancer or not, whether you would have cervical cancer risks or not. Or when we're looking at veterans, like Representative McBurney and myself. Representative McBurney served 3 tours of duty abroad. He had a lot of smoke inhalation and exposures that increases his risk for lung cancer. I do not have as high of a risk, not being a veteran myself. It would change the way I would treat him, the way I would approach his health and his health care. This amendment in front of us today acknowledges these differences, acknowledges that diversity and equity are critical to making sure that Iowans stay healthy, that they get access to the care that they need, and that each of us deserve. ACGME, or the accreditation body for graduate medical education, sets forth the standards for any given medical school in the United States as far as what they need to teach in their curriculum, what their students need to be able to learn in order to actually be competent physicians by the time they graduate. From their own website, one of the core competencies, which is competency 5B.1.A, each medical student must be taught to respect and have responsiveness to diverse patient populations, including but not limited to diversity in gender, age, culture, religion, disabilities, national origin, socioeconomic status, and sexual orientation. It is required in order for a medical school to be accredited that we teach these principles. We teach principles that teach people how to be better doctors and take care of their community. Without this amendment, this bill puts the accreditation of our medical school in danger. When we already have a massive physician shortage in our state, we are 44th worst in the nation for physician shortages. We should be doing everything to enhance the ability for our medical school to graduate competent physicians that can go out into the community and take care of our community members. We need this amendment to ensure that we're able to do that. We need this amendment to make sure that each Iowan is celebrated for who they are, and because of who they are, their story is glorified so they can live a healthy existence and continue to manifest what enables them to be them. So I ask you to adopt this amendment to make sure that we continue to produce a great healthcare workforce in the state of Iowa. Thank you.
Is there a discussion? The chair recognizes Representative Holt.
Thank you, Representative Srinivas. Thank you for the discussion a little while ago on your amendment. I know your concerns regarding the language. If you go to the definitions in the bill, I do not see how this legislation would in any way prevent legitimate teaching or discussions of medical differences or the reality that certain races might be more likely to suffer from certain conditions or the things you discussed. If you look at the definitions, we'll go over those real quick. First definition promotes the idea that racially neutral or colorblind laws, policies, or institutions perpetuate oppression. That doesn't touch what you're discussing. Promotes the differential treatment of any individual or groups based on race or ethnicity. That doesn't touch it because you're talking about medical differences based on legitimate medical differences in humans, so that doesn't apply. Promotes the idea that a student is biased on account of the student's race or sex, which is scapegoating. That doesn't appear to me to apply either. Representative Taylor worked extensively with the regents. That's why we had the amendment that removed the section earlier. They are in favor of the bill. This was never mentioned as a concern, so I think certainly if there was some threat to accreditation of a medical school, the regents would have brought that up to Representative Taylor in those discussions. So I do not believe this applies in the manner in which you're suggesting, and I would urge the body to resist this amendment. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Representative Wilburn.
Good afternoon, Mr. Speaker, members of the House. Representative Holt, I do disagree with your interpretation of part of the definition, and although the regents did express support for the bill, I want to go back to promotes the differential treatment of any individual or groups of individuals based on race or ethnicity. In contemporary American society, I believe what Representative Srinivas brought forward were specific examples. And so I rise in support of Representative Srinivas's amendment. With this bill, the bill in its entirety, if a med or nursing student can opt out, which it may require the bill will require, if a student can opt out of a required class to learn about medical conditions that focus on illnesses that disparately affect women or other diverse populations, they can potentially cause harm to whole communities. I remember being prescribed an alternative medication for a condition that I have that was different from my usual prescription. This was done in a good faith effort by not my regular medical provider. It was an effort to look at saving money without consulting me, but also, as it turned out, there were a significant number of studies that showed that African Americans had a greater possibility of allergic reaction. It could have been uncomfortable, or it could have been life-threatening. My regular doctor caught that. I would think we want our medical providers to have the opportunity to receive such training and to be incentivized to attend or specialize in treating some communities, as the bill as written may prevent. There are several other medical conditions that different races or ethnic groups may be more sensitive to based on race, including some that affect whites more. There are several studies. Rural was brought up earlier as a diverse group on an earlier bill. And there are some studies that show cancer rates that folks in rural communities are more susceptible. So disagreement with Representative Holt. I do think this is an important amendment. And I think further conversation with the Regents institutions on this particular one is worthwhile. Please don't let any enthusiasm for trying to address diversity, equity, and inclusion by adopting this bill without this legitimate medical concern and practice.
Seeing no further discussion, the chair recognizes Representative Srinivas for closing remarks, Amendment H1111.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank Representative Wilburn for those comments. In addition to the clause that he also highlighted, I would respectfully disagree with Representative Holt, because here it removes the requirement for any training based on diversity, equity, and inclusion. We cannot teach an obstetrics and gynecology course without talking about what is biased towards women's health. We cannot teach a rural health course without talking about how farmers have a higher risk of dementia than urban dwellers. We cannot teach about people with disabilities. We cannot teach about different race ethnicity differences when it comes to healthcare. We cannot teach about young versus old, especially when there's a whole concentration in class talked about geriatric medicine, unless we are able to address the diversity that exists in our populations and the equity that we must make our decisions as medical providers with. This is a critical stipulation. We need healthcare. Each and every single one of us in this state relies on good nurses, good pharmacists, good physicians, good nurse practitioners, good PAs. We rely on a good healthcare workforce that is knowledgeable and trained by the best in our universities. And now we're going to be handcuffing them because of a bias. Is your health really worth that? Is your family's health worth that? Is your community's health worth that? The people who voted for you to be here wanted you to make the best decisions for them. And I can tell you right now, the best decision for them is making sure that their doctor is well trained, that their nurse knows how to give them the best treatment possible. It's making sure you stick up for their health today by voting for this amendment, because this is critical to the health of our state. So I urge you to pass this today, and with that, I move this amendment with a division in record.
Representative Srinivas moves Amendment H1111, requests a division in record. Second by Representative Conference is now a record roll call vote. The clerk will proceed to receive your vote. Wilson votes aye. Bowden votes no. Sexton votes no. Deacon votes no. Bloomingdale votes no. Have you all now voted? Clerk close the machine. The House may attend to results of the vote. Those voting aye, 33. Those voting no, 64. Absent or not, voting 3. The amendment has failed. That disposes of all amendments. We're now on discussion on House File 269. Chair recognizes Representative Westbrook Rochelle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, colleagues of the House. Maya Angelou famously stated that diversity makes for a rich tapestry, and we must understand that all the threads of the tapestry are equal in value, no matter their color. Diversity enriches our lives. It enriches our lives in the sciences, in engineering, in veterinary medicine, in the social sciences. It is important to our lives and to our education. The U.S. leads the world in higher education, and Iowans have always taken great pride in their universities. It's going to be hard to maintain the quality without diversity, equity, and inclusion. A college education should be about self-discovery. It shouldn't be about censorship. I appreciate that the Iowa Chamber Alliance supports efforts to make Iowa a welcoming environment that is inclusive of a broad diversity of people, that attracts and retains a dynamic workforce and promotes population growth from their 2025 legislative priorities. Recognizing and promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion helps us move forward. This bill and others that we will be discussing today take us 100 steps backwards. The diversity, equity, and inclusion ban has already gone too far. One ISU professor has been asked not to require her students to watch a video about Percy Julian, who was an African-American chemist working at a time when his race severely hampered his ability to get an education and his work as a scientist. Despite this, Julian went on to become one of the best biochemists to ever have lived. Yet no one knows his name. This ISU professor always assigned this video to her students to broaden their knowledge of preeminent figures in her field and to have them think about how societal ideas impact scientific progress. How societal ideas impact scientific progress. This professor always felt the students learned a lot about both scientific research and how society can put barriers in place to stall that research. Diversity, equity, and inclusion policies have improved scientific research. Her students often can't believe they had never heard of Percy Julian before. Have you? I have to admit that I had not. Again, the diversity, equity, and inclusion ban has already gone too far. Project Search is a collaborative education program for disabled adults. The ARC of Story County and ISU provide education and training. Almost all of the graduates of the program are hired by the departments that they trained in at ISU. When representatives from Project Search came to the Capitol a few weeks ago, they informed me that they were losing funding because of cuts to diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, despite the fact that this program is filling some of our workforce challenges. Diversity, equity, and inclusion helps us understand our cultural differences. It is the right thing to do, and it is good for Iowa. We must create a welcoming environment for all Iowans, including gender, race, ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation and identity, and disabilities. Unfortunately, these qualified groups frequently get overlooked based on disability or the color of their skin, and more. Diversity, equity, and inclusion assures us that the most qualified person, the person with the most merit, regardless of race, disability, or gender, will get accepted into college or get a job, but only if we learn about it. It helps persons with different abilities become employed, and it enriches our lives. Again, Maya Angelou said, diversity makes for a rich tapestry, and we must understand that all the threads of the tapestry are equal in value, no matter their color. Diversity enriches my life. I want it to continue to enrich my life. I will not vote to take us 100 steps back. I will stay on the side of history and support diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Chair recognizes Representative Wilburn.
Good afternoon, Mr. Speaker. I want to rise in opposition to the main bill, House File 269, as amended. The two amendments we just considered earlier represented attempts to clear up a bill that has consequences that may be unforeseen, especially with what I consider a knee-jerk reaction to diversity, equity, and inclusion, like some of us might view the bill's title, the Freedom from Indoctrination Act. We've already seen that with the bill that passed last session, this knee-jerk reaction. I shared as a point of personal privilege as part of it yesterday on a couple Iowa school districts after all of that, removing the book Roots by Alex Haley, which I and many others began to explore our own personal family journey. And I also shared about, under President Trump's directive, the Department of Defense deleting their social media and stored images representing women and people of color. Don't react like the jerk reaction to that, where they initially removed images of the Enola Gay aircraft from World War II images because of the word gay that showed up in a search in their files. And the Iowa Army National Guard having to remove that from those materials from their social media content. Overall, I believe this is overreach. It's micromanaging. Students don't know what they don't know, and preventing our educational institutions from requiring courses that help students become aware of their own culture and others, preventing them from examining how their personal culture and any cultures and organizations that they may end up working in affect their ability to work across difference in both negative and positive ways. And we want to be able to have our students work across any difference we have in positive ways. We don't want to stop them from building skills to increase their ability to work with others who are different than they are, based on race, sex, gender, age, ability, rural, urban. We don't want to stop them from requiring courses because they don't know that it will help them prevent misunderstandings and conflict that often result in human resource complaints as well as lawsuits. Limiting our institution's programming to what is required, only what is required by Title IX, ADA, Age Discrimination Act, and Civil Rights Act of 1964, which this bill does, it really focuses on complaints. In fact, only in parts of the bill, they're allowed to have attorneys that address diversity, equity, and inclusion concepts, but not be required to be taught by faculty. That really focuses on complaints and not on learning how to understand to work together, how to live together. When I was with the school district investigating complaints of discrimination, sexual harassment, and bullying, my caseloads of complaints were so much easier to manage when proactive education, training, courses, and courses that were required. I'm going to end with a couple things. Earlier the county legislation about the districts in the vote today, an example of the Jim Crow laws were brought up in regards to representation for rural Iowa. Interesting argument, by the way. And I congratulate you on that affirmative action of inclusion of the diversity that rural Iowa brings to the table. That's inclusion, if that's what you base your decision on, and believe that rural Iowans face the same level of problems that Jim Crow laws created. In order to round out that educational moment that we had, I will add that Jim Crow laws mandated racial segregation in various public facilities, including schools, transportation, restrooms, and water fountains. Jim Crow laws were much more than simple representation for election. So I'm asking you to vote no on what I believe is further micromanaging of the State Board of Regents and the institutions. I mentioned on the Iowa Press Show, if you believe that the Board of Regents is not acting responsibly in how they've been governing the Regents institutions, then you don't need to limit discussion in an academic setting. You can simply let Governor Reynolds know that you don't like her appointees. In conclusion, as you think about your vote on this bill and the intent and the overall title of this bill, yes, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s lofty goal in his I Have a Dream speech, a great goal, was important and is something we should aspire to. But remember, he also was not revered as many, but not all, appreciate. When he was assassinated, he was protesting, preparing to march and support unionized sanitation workers. We need to have the academic freedom. It's very clever that the bill says that it's not limiting this, but as I stated earlier, sometimes students don't know what they don't know. This will lead us on a course of just further complaints, lawsuits, and not the opportunity for education, understanding, learning how to work across difference, learning how to make yourself a very viable candidate for jobs, especially those that interact with other cultures and other communities around the world. Vote no.
Chair recognizes Representative Madison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the House. I have a letter from my constituent, and I have many of these on the subject of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so I'm just going to share this one with you. And as you know, there are many bills that we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and banning that. So I'm hoping to help you a little bit. These bills are not about improving education or governance. They are about censorship, exclusion, and erasing important conversations that prepare students for the real world, real people. They will make our institutions less competitive, less inclusive, and potentially unaccredited, all while silencing discussion about race, gender. These bills acknowledge that they could jeopardize accreditation from for public institutions, but instead of fixing the problem, it empowers the Attorney General to sue accrediting bodies rather than ensuring our schools remain accredited. It weakens protections for marginalized students by removing identity-based language from the state's bullying statute, making it harder to address target harassment. And if this wasn't further reason enough, when we try to create a color-blind society, as the bill suggests, you only get half of the information. I'm going to tell you two stories. One, I was in the grocery store, and in front of me was a mother, bright red hair, and a little boy, bright red hair, both white. And he's sitting in the cart playing with something. And I'm just pulling up, and I put my things on the belt. And he says, "You're where life and death happened, or didn't happen for some people." And I didn't want to do the roll call because it's a long list of people, black people, people of color, whose deaths have been highlighted by movements and by the lack of diversity, equity, inclusion. The people involved didn't know how to just look at the humanity of that person. Of diversity, equity, inclusion. The people involved didn't find out. I'm going to talk about one particular know how to just look at the humanity of that person. Of diversity, equity, inclusion. The people involved didn't find out. I'm going to talk about one particular know how to just look at the humanity of that person. Of diversity, equity, inclusion. The people involved didn't find out. I'm going to talk about one particular know how to just look at the humanity of that person. Of diversity, equity, inclusion. The people involved didn't find out. I'm going to talk about one particular know how to just look at the humanity of that person. Of diversity, equity, inclusion. The people involved didn't find out. I'm going to talk about one particular know how to just look at the humanity of that person. Of diversity, equity, inclusion. The people involved didn't find out. I'm going to talk about one particular know how to just look at the humanity of that person. Of diversity, equity, inclusion. The people involved didn't find out. I'm going to talk about one particular know how to just look at the humanity of that person. Of diversity, equity, inclusion. The people involved didn't find out. I'm going to talk about one particular know how to just look at the humanity. Diversity, equity, inclusion. You're not afraid because you see a black man jogging or you see a black woman, whatever. We live life as you do, and that would be your first response. Oh, he's jogging, and you keep it moving. But he did not wake up that day, and his family grieved about that. And that's the other piece people don't understand. You just talk about the incident, and you go on, but those people spend a lifetime grieving and marking what happened to their loved one. So it's bigger than just on paper. It's bigger than giving a student a class, because when they take a job, when they buy a house, or let's say they rent to someone, they don't say when they see the black family come up to buy the house or to rent the house, "Oh, we've already sold it. It's already taken." They look at all the aspects connected with if anybody walked up. How can you afford it? And that's another thing. We label diversity, equity, inclusion as someone that doesn't come with all the skills. To go to Ireland, and we laughed and talked about it, and I talked to someone else that day at this event. And he was Ireland, and we laughed and talked. The various people who've come into our country struggle because people didn't know. And so each one had a fight. Each one had a fight. And it goes to African Americans as well, Latinos, all kinds of people. That's what Martin Luther King Jr. And so go beyond justice. Everybody in this chamber wants justice. You might not need it, as I might need it if I go to various places, but still you all want it. So I just think this is a bigger issue that you're trying to slap a ban on, and that's going to take care of it. The people are still out there, uneducated.
Representative Madison, your time has expired. Chair recognizes Representative McBurney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, members of the House. Would the representative from Polk, Representative Srinivas, yield to a line of questions?
Will the representative yield?
Sure.
You're in order.
I know, fairly unique Democrat to Democrat, but I did have some questions that needed your expertise because outside of the House, you are a doctor, correct? A medical doctor?
Is this a trick question?
Yes,
I
I've
am.
known you a little while, and you did graduate from the University of Iowa and have been practicing for how many years?
For 11 years now.
Great. So, specific to veterans, would you say that percentage?
Veterans and potentially some other people who might have had that exposure, but yes.
Percentage.
Veterans and potentially some other people who might have had that exposure, but yes. Yeah,
So,
very unique.
In your opinion, would this bill impact your ability to be able to learn those diverse characteristics of veterans specifically?
Oh, most definitely. If I hadn't been required to do a rotation at the Veterans Hospital in Iowa City during medical school, which was specifically to learn about the differences, the diversity that veteran populations have, and enable me to do better at delivering equity in their treatment, I wouldn't be able to take care of many of my patients to the extent that I do.
And would you say that there are other common factors across everyday lives, such as PTSD, that you would encounter, but if you were to encounter a veteran specifically, that may sway how you diagnose and help out a patient that is specifically a veteran?
Oh, very much so. I have a perfect example of that, actually. One of my very first patients in residency, who I then followed for 3 years as his primary care physician, he opened up to me at one point. Based on his physical exam, I saw he had some scarring that, based on what I had learned in medical school during my VA rotation, taught me was consistent with torture. I knew he was a Vietnam War veteran, and based on our conversations, I was the first person he ever told that he had been held in a prison camp and tortured for several months. And that actually did increase his exposure to different diseases that ended up impacting my ability to give care, choose medications, and diagnosis for him.
So would you say if you were not taught that at the University of Iowa, veterans in the state of Iowa would actually have a lower level of care than other states?
Most definitely. He had slipped through the system for years not getting that care, and it was those conversations based on me learning about physical exam techniques that enabled that care to finally be delivered to this veteran.
All right, well, thank you very much, Dr. Srinivas, Representative Srinivas.
Thank you.
Would Representative Holt yield to a single question?
Will the representative yield? You're in order.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Representative Holt. Representative Holt, you and I are both veterans. You and I both served in the military. You served in the Marines. And thank you for your service, because I will always give Marines credit for being the first in and the last out. We're the Air Force. We just kind of fly over the battle.
I agree.
Thank you very much. Based on what Representative consideration during the drafting of
enhances our problem-solving skills, personal growth and learning, resilience and adaptability, improved decision-making, increased empathy and compassion, and better representation. I bring this up because I feel as though the atmosphere in this conversation we might come to a very different perspective and consideration of this bill. And I would ask you to take a look at that. Why are we further limiting our capability in the world market by being less than world ready? And that's what diversity, equity, and inclusion will render us if we go forward. Thank you.
Seeing no further discussion, the chair recognizes Representative Holt for closing remarks on House File 269.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And again, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the House. So in my opinion, this is another example of a piece of legislation. I've seen this happen several times on the floor of this chamber. I think this is one of the most misrepresented. Critical race theory, let's look at the definitions because I think they're very, very important. So here they are. Promotes the idea that racially neutral or colorblind laws, policies, or institutions perpetuate oppression. Promotes the idea that racially neutral or colorblind laws, policies, or institutions perpetuate oppression. Next one. Promotes the differential treatment of any individual or groups of individuals based on race or ethnicity in contemporary American society. Man, that would have been really popular in the civil rights movement of the 1960s. But somehow today, it's terrible to forbid that. Promote the idea that a student is biased on account of the student's race or sex. Scapegoating, in other words. You're white. You have white privilege. You should be ashamed. You need to apologize for who you are. You need to apologize because you're white. If you're white, you're an oppressor. If you're a minority, you're oppressed. That's the things that this is saying cannot be a condition for a degree program or cannot be used against employees of the Regent universities. There's nothing here that talks about veterans. Veteran is not in this bill at all, and it isn't in these definitions at all. So you want to talk about, in my opinion, a red herring and a total misrepresentation of this legislation. It has nothing to do with veterans. The idea that you could not discuss Agent Orange or any of these other veterans issues, read the bill. In my opinion, that is a ridiculous misrepresentation of what this bill does. It doesn't prevent medical personnel from discussing legitimate differences in people. We know that certain races or certain individuals are prone to certain diseases or certain conditions. Doesn't prevent any of that. And I would agree with a comment that was made on the floor that diversity enriches our lives. That is 100% true, but not when it is used to divide us. Not when it is used to divide us, which is exactly what DEI programs do. And nothing in this legislation would prevent the video that was mentioned on the floor of this chamber from being shown. So I wish that DEI was as noble as has been suggested on the floor of this chamber. I wish it taught us to celebrate our differences, but it doesn't. In my opinion, DEI at its core is racist, which is one of the reasons we are becoming so divided as a nation. Teaching the golden rule, treat others as you want to be treated, or judge on character instead of skin color, we wouldn't have a problem. But you see, unfortunately, DEI is doing exactly the opposite, and all you need to do is go and look at what it's teaching to confirm that that is true. Just look at what it is teaching. It is teaching it is scapegoating entire groups of people, often teaching that white people are automatically oppressors. Never mind character, doesn't matter. If you're white, you're automatically oppressor, and people of color are automatically oppressed. I've seen it on the slides from the University of Iowa. This is or was, probably still is, in these DEI programs. Shaming. individuals based upon their race. During a presentation a year or so ago by one of the universities, I and other legislators saw with our own eyes that one of the DEI courses at the University of Iowa, right up there on the screen, taught that meritocracy was a part of white supremacy. Meritocracy, getting ahead because you bust your butt, getting a job because you bust your butt, that is white supremacy. So I sat there looking at that slide thinking, well, what are we supposed to promote people based on? What are we supposed to hire people based on? Their skin color? I thought we tried to get away from that for like 5 decades. We supposed to hire based on someone's sexual orientation? Or would it just be a better idea and fair for everyone just to hire based upon meritocracy, merit? But that's what it's teaching, white supremacy. That's meritocracy, white supremacy. So I wonder then what young people are left thinking in terms of how or why they should be hired. These programs are at the root of why, in my opinion, our country has been dealing with many of the issues we have dealt with over the last several years. And let me say, this is not a knee-jerk reaction. We have been hearing about this for years from Iowa college students. Many students and parents have come to us. A student in my own district who my wife taught at school contacted me when he was going through the dental school at the University of Iowa and couldn't believe he was being taught these things I just mentioned. That if he was white, he was automatically an oppressor, and he had stuff to apologize for, and meritocracy being a part of white supremacy. And he said, why am I having to go through this in dental school? Exactly why am I having to deal with this? Many other students, many other parents have come to us on these issues. It's not a knee-jerk reaction in any shape, form, or fashion. And I love the parade of horribles that always come out. If this happens, if that happens, there's no way that anything we've ever passed would require the removal of the Enola Gay picture. I mean, some of the things, it's beyond the pale. And I think some of these things are done just to try to make the legislation we've done look bad so they can run to the press and say, see, this was done or that was done. Not true. And the divisive concepts we're talking about here that our students have come to us and talked about that were in 802 a few years ago, you remember that? That one race is inherently superior to another, that the United States of America is inherently racist or sexist, the list goes on and on. Not diversity, equity, and inclusion. In my opinion, the people of Iowa and the people of our country are done with tolerating that which divides us. The more DEI has been taught over the last several years, it seems the more divided we have become. Americans believe we're more divided than ever, with almost half of young people today describing our founding fathers as villain when they're given that word as an option. Yeah, I wonder where that came from. So a better name for diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, in my opinion, would be adversity, inequity, and exclusion, because that is what these programs do. Indoctrinating young people to see everything through the prism of race is incredibly destructive, creating adversity between people, inequity for those who do not fit the narrative, and exclusion for those who do not agree. Why not character? Why not we talk about that? DEI and critical race theory concepts are toxic to our country, to our melting pot. Our national motto was once e pluribus unum, out of many, one. That was a concept in our country, and we had a lot of work to do to get there as we work to be a more perfect union. But this concept that once united us as Americans is being utterly destroyed by this destructive ideology that demands that I first look at each of you in this chamber based upon what color you are, as opposed to who you are. Let us judge by character, not skin color, and let us teach young people that it is character that counts. Out of many, one people, and one nation under God. Mr. Speaker, I move House File 269.
Representative Holt moves House File 269 be read for the last time and placed on its passage. Are there objections? Hearing none, the clerk will read.
House File 269, a bill for an act prohibiting certain requirements for students and faculty at Regent institutions related to diversity, equity, and inclusion and critical race theory, and including applicability provisions being enacted by the General Assembly of the State of Iowa.
Question on shall the bill pass? All in favor is passed to vote aye. Those opposed vote no. The clerk will machine receive your vote. Kaufman votes aye. Lawler votes aye. Wood votes aye. Meyer-Webster votes aye. Have you all now voted? Clerk close machine. The House may attention results of the vote. Those voting aye 63, those voting no 33, absent or not voting for. Will have received a constitutional majority is declared to have passed the House. There objection to the title. Chair hears none and the title is agreed to. Chair recognizes Representative Holt for opening remarks on House File 401.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and again, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the House. The Core Curriculum Act requires the Board of Regents to adopt general education requirements for undergraduate students that include 6 semester hours of English, social sciences, and the humanities, 4 hours of natural sciences, 3 hours of math and statistics, and 3 hours of Western heritage. It further states that the general education requirements not exceed 37 hours. For Western heritage, the legislation stipulates that coursework satisfying the requirement could consist of survey courses such as Western civilization, British literature, or Greek philosophy. For American heritage, the legislation spells out that coursework satisfying the requirement will consist of survey courses such as American history, Iowa history, American government, or American literature. The coursework for Western heritage would satisfy the required semester hours for English, social studies, or the humanities. And for American heritage, it would satisfy the semester hours for social studies or the humanities once the amendment comes around. The legislation further states that if an institution has established a Center for Intellectual Freedom or a Center for Civic Education, those centers are mandated to annually review and approve the course requirements for Western heritage and American heritage. The legislation further mandates the Board of Regents to ensure that these courses do not distort significant historical events or include any curriculum based on the divisive concepts spelled out in 802. Exceptions are given in any degree for any degree program that is 3 years or less or is determined by the Board of Regents to be a complex field of studies. This legislation becomes effective in the academic year 2027. Mr. Speaker, there are amendments.
Will the clerk call up the first amendment?
H1110 by Holt of Crawford.
Chair recognizes Representative Holt for opening remarks. Amendment H1110.
I'm running this one. Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This amendment strikes school on page 2, lines 18 and 20, leaving the terminology center as opposed to school. It also removes the word English on page 2, line 2, so that American heritage would satisfy the required semester hours for social studies or the humanities, but not English. This concludes my opening remarks.
Is there discussion? Seeing none, the chair recognizes Representative Holt. Representative Holt moves amendment H1110. All those in favor shall say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The amendment is adopted. With the adoption of amendment H1110, amendment H1085 is out of order. That disposes of all amendments. We are on discussion on House File 401. Chair recognizes Representative Wilburn.
Good afternoon, Mr. Speaker, members of the House. I rise in opposition to this. I believe it's the auspice, should be the auspice of the Board of Regents, working with our Regents institutions to determine what that curriculum might be, regardless of whether this sets a floor or not. I will just comment about a couple items in this, in particular, though, in light of earlier discussion. I think one of the dangers, let me back off that. One of the areas of concern that many of us have with the language of some of the bills, and again, in their effort to, in my opinion, the enthusiasm which folks are addressing, trying to get rid of diversity, equity, and inclusion. One particular item under this, the new section where it talks about the board shall adopt a policy where they do not distort significant historical events. This doesn't determine who We'll say whether a historical event has been distorted or not. It's not defined. I don't know if that's going to be left to the Board of Regents, and we could do the circular argument where someone makes a complaint because they didn't understand, they were upset by a historical event that was taught, and whether or not it's distorted or not, or does that come back to the legislature? The Constitution of the United States, the original document. If someone is teaching about the original document, women are not referred into here as having rights. All men are created equal. You might argue that that's a generic concept, but back at the time, it meant men because they could hold property. As a black person, African American, free blacks or persons who were enslaved were counted in the original document of the Constitution as 3/5 of a person, not because they had any rights or voting rights that were removed because of Jim Crow laws after the Civil War, but for the purposes of property and making sure that a property holder had certain rights under the Constitution. And so, does it come back to the legislature that someone has distorted historical information or not? Will the institutions be allowed to determine that or not? And while the previous bill that just passed, I'll bring this back to this legislation, did say that there could be an exemption for some diversity, equity, inclusion concepts that are required by following the federal law that I talked about earlier. There's also, it says under that specific item that a student still cannot be required to take such of a course. So I'll go back to my original statement. I rise in opposition to this House file. I think this is the work of the Board of Regents and the institutions themselves.
Seeing no further discussion, the chair recognizes Representative Holt for closing remarks on House File 401.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And again, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the House. Well, I think we left it up to the so-called experts for many years, and in my opinion, they mucked it up. We're seeing disturbing deficiencies in English. We have seen across our country and in our state a disturbing lack of knowledge regarding the principles that made us who we are. Many of those principles coming from Western civilization and many established by our own Constitution, Bill of Rights, and incredible traditions. In order to establish consistency across all of our region institutions, to continue up that scaffolding, to improve skills in English, and also to further enforce the principles of Western civilization and of American exceptionalism, I believe this bill is fundamentally important.